Literacy Council.
That's right.
Okay, there you go. You've got all that, but he specializes in helping healthcare professionals, executives, and business owners with investment, insurance, retirement, and estate planning. And these are a few interests I didn't know about G. He enjoys playing fingerstyle guitar. Now, maybe some of you know what fingerstyle guitar is. I have no idea what it is. So later I have to ask.
So maybe I can show you later on.
And playing a variety of sports. And he puts down to me, he loves being here at the church and serving. And he's been a good friend for many years, so I'm so glad that he's here. So let's give him a warm welcome.
Well, good morning, and thank you for letting me swing by your fellowship. It's really, truly an honor and a privilege. So thanks for letting me hang out here this morning with you guys. You know, we're going to be talking about a concept that's discussed so many times throughout Scripture, and that has to do with finances. It's really interesting. The Bible talks about love about 550 times, faith about 500 times, and hope about 150 times. So then, show of hands, who wants to take a guess? How many times do you think the Bible talks about money? What do we think? Throw out some guesses for me.
200 times.
200 times? Sure. Just shout them out, shout them out. What do you think?
100 times.
100 times? Maybe one more?
500.
500? Believe it or not, the Bible actually talks about money more than 2,000 times in the Bible. So it talks about money more than faith, love, and hope combined. And as Pastor Arthur was mentioning, we've been doing discipleship for a few years now. And one of the things that he taught me early on in terms of learning how to read Scripture is he told me, when you see repetition in the Bible, sometimes what this means is it's an important concept. So clearly, finances are this important concept to Christians. And I believe in 1 Corinthians, it tells us to live our lives doing everything for the glory of God. So then the question I ask myself is, does that not involve also then this stewardship, the management of how Christians ought to manage God's finances? So this is exactly what we're going to talk about today, primarily focused in the areas of estate planning and retirement planning. But in order for me to do so, I can't speak on my own words, so how about we dive into a word of prayer and we seek the Holy Spirit's guidance. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we're just blessed and thankful for us to have this resource in this space, first and foremost. So thank you for blessing us with the church and each other in this community. Lord, we want to set aside our Saturday morning here to meet with you. And for a particular cause, we're hoping to enter into this conversation of one that is often either neglected or the can is kicked down the road in terms of importance. And we want to discern and identify what is it that you would like us to do with your finances. And so, Father, it's not my words that need to be heard, but it's truly yours. So I call upon the Holy Spirit in Jesus' name to just speak through me. And may any minds and ears and hearts be opened up. And if somebody is supposed to receive a sort of message, then I just ask that your will is done and you make that happen. We thank you, we love you, and we look forward to this conversation. Pray all this in Jesus' name, amen. Can everybody hear me okay? I don't have a mic, right? Yeah? Okay. Just let me know if
you need a mic, if people need a mic, we can set one up.
Just let me know. Yeah, okay. So, let's dive in here. The objective of today's conversation is to improve our understanding of how to honor God through faith-based financial planning. We're called to be in this world, but not of this world. Likewise, we want to have a degree of separation.
G, you asked me about recording.
Oh yes, is that okay?
For you people, is it okay if G records the talk? For anybody who wants to. Okay,
Perfect.
There you are.
Okay. So we're asked to be in this world, but not of this world. As Christians, we have a degree of separation from the world. And so likewise, our financial planning should reflect this as well. So that's our objective today, to understand these concepts. Really quickly, so Pastor Arthur gave a quick rundown, but I'd like to introduce myself and the firm that I'm with as well, just to set some context. So I'm with a team called Financial Literacy Council. We're celebrating 25 years of building financially literate generations. And so there's three main components to what it is that we do. First of all, we go to a number of different organizations and associations, and we provide financial literacy sessions for them to help families understand how it is that they can better make use of their finances. And so then we also provide long-term financial planning ideas on a one-on-one or family basis. We believe in developing these relationships over a long period of time and creating customized solutions for each and every family. And lastly, what sets us apart, I would say, is that we have this service called Family Office Services. And the idea here is that we're able to prepare wealth inheritors, so the next generation, how to be properly responsible with stewarding mommy and dad's money so that they don't end up blowing it all by the second or third generation. This is a service that we provide to educate the next generation. In terms of myself, I grew up in Vancouver, but my family was an immigrant family from South Korea. And so, as maybe some of you may know, if you come from another country, a lot of your degrees and previous experiences, they go out the window. So we didn't have a lot growing up. I remember we moved every 2 years or so from one city to a cheaper city to a cheaper city. And there was this one summer though, where we had a very large inheritance. My grandparents both passed away, and so we were given a large sum of money. And my dad, he took that money and he did what he thought was best with it, which is to go to downtown Vancouver, rent a sub-penthouse apartment, buy BMWs, luxury clothes. You might have heard of stories like this a lot, but I lived it. About 2.5 years later, I remember my mom one Saturday morning tells me to sit down beside her. And so I sit down and I knew something was quite serious. And she told me, I don't know how to tell you this, but we have to move again. The money's gone. And so I remember I wasn't upset. I remember just thinking back and reflecting, where was the gap? What went wrong here? Clearly it wasn't a resource problem. It was a literacy problem. They had the money. They just weren't sure exactly what to do with the money. And so I was thinking about, how is it that some families start off with so much and end up with nothing? Other families start off with so little and end up with so much. That's when I decided, as I look back at my life, I would love to be in a position where if my dad had somebody to talk to, I think his whole life could be different. In fact, his whole family's life could look very different. And so I wanted to be that person where if a family had an opportunity to steward some wealth, maybe I could help them understand their options and allow them to not have to move unless it is that they wanted to. So that was the divine calling that I felt, and that's how I ended up in the industry here today. So I always tell people, for yourselves, each and every single one of you in this room, you're going to be retiring one time in your life. But I help people retire every single day. So that's my goal, to help us understand what are our options to best optimize for retirement and estate planning. In terms of myself, a little bit more detail in terms of with regards to the vocation, I am a responsible investment specialist. RIS is my designation. What that means is I'm able to help someone align their values with their investment portfolio better now than ever before. So if they have faith-based values or they have social or governance concerns, I'm able to either withdraw, extract, or input any particular companies within the portfolio so it aligns with their values. I also specialize working with healthcare and business owners. However, I'm not limited to these demographics. I help people with their investment planning, helping them get to retirement, purchase their first home or rental properties. I help them with insurance planning, such as critical illness insurance, life insurance, for examples. And then if somebody else is self-employed or incorporated, I help them understand how to structure the corporation so it's really tax efficient, helps them understand how to hit their goals. And then of course, what we're going to be discussing today, the retirement and estate planning side of things. How do you get from your working years to what we call our work optional years? What that means is you wake up one Wednesday morning and you go, I don't feel like going to work today. And guess what? You don't have to. You work because you want to, not because you have to. This is what we define as retirement. Estate planning basically defines as financial planning at death. Once you pass away, there's going to be a large tax bill. How do I transfer wealth from my generation to the next, really tax efficiently, but also based on the values that I have? I'd like to also just show this last slide for the introduction to build a little bit more context of what it is that I do on a day-to-day basis. So as a firm, that education component, we have the privilege of serving a number of different communities. So you can see on the top here, we've had the privilege of working with ECBC Med School, a number of different high schools. On the right, you can see we work with Canadian Olympians, for example. The idea is hopefully we allow them to not have to worry about money so they can bring us more gold medals. And then we work with accountants, lawyers, healthcare, so we help with the Vancouver Coastal Health or Fraser Health Authority with their retirement readiness program. And our bread and butter, one of our niche specializations is working with physicians. Okay, so here's the agenda. Here are the three main areas that I'm going to be focusing on today. The first is to put first things first, understanding how to build a Christ-centered financial house. We're going to be building this house together and looking at the different rooms that comprise of it. And then we'll be looking at healthy relationships associated along the way. Number two is we'll be diving into the estate planning side of things. What do the tax implications look like? What are the legal implications looking like with estate planning for generational wealth? And then number three, I'll be diving right into retirement planning, how to utilize things like tax planning and investment planning to help us get there a lot more efficiently. So the first concept is going to be looking at how do we put God in the center of everything. And when it comes to the idea of stewardship, what it means is we're managers. What we think we own on this side of heaven is actually on loan. We don't actually own any of the things, but rather we're managers. We're stewards of the wealth that God has entrusted us with. And a verse I love to back this is going to be Psalms 24:1. Maybe we can read it together. The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it, the world and all its people belong to it. To put this to life, I have this really wonderful analogy that John Piper likes to say. So, in his book, Desiring God, I want you to imagine that there's a young man who enters into a museum. He goes into this museum, and he looks at the art pieces on the wall, and he goes, I like this one. I'm going to take it off and put it under my arm. He walks over to the other side of the wall. He says, I like this one too. I'm going to claim it to be mine. Puts it under his arm. He walks around, he starts just taking all these art pieces off the wall and puts it under his arm. Someone looks at him and goes, what are you doing? These things don't belong to you. But the young man says, sure it does. I'm an art collector. And it's under my arm. Look, it belongs to me. But here's the thing. When the young man tries to exit that museum, the guard stops him and goes, no, you didn't come in with these things. You can't leave with these things. These don't belong to you. So what this means here is we come into this world with nothing, and we're also going to leave with nothing. The focus should not be how do I build wealth here on this side of heaven, but it should be what does my eternal bank account look like? How can I accumulate that side of there? And so John Piper says this, we brought nothing into this world, so we cannot take anything out of it. There are no U-Hauls behind hearses. And so when we're looking at stewardship, the idea here once again is what has God entrusted with me while I am here temporarily, and how can I then best manage that while I'm here? So in terms of managing it, Tim Keller says there's only 3 things that we can do with money. Number 1 is we can spend it, then we can save it, or we can share it. And it said that your bank account is a reflection of your values. It cannot lie. This is what I mean. If somebody comes to me and says, I really value and prioritize health and eating healthy, then I might look at their bank account, but what if I see things like credit card and bank statements all going towards cigarettes or alcohol or junk food or no gym membership? Then there's a disalignment here. So likewise, we would want as Christians to make sure that our bank account reflects what our values are. In order for us to know what those transactions look like, we first need to know what it is that the scripture commands us to do. 1 Timothy 6:10 also mentions that money in itself is not evil, but the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Money is actually just a tool, and it's a tool that amplifies. Think of it like a microphone. It amplifies who you are already, and what needs to be focused on is the heart posture. Here's what I mean. If there's a really selfish person, and this person is given even more money, then they can become increasingly more selfish. However, if you take a very generous person and you give them more money, then they can become radically more generous. So that heart posture is very, very key. And an excellent question that I was asked early in my career that I asked myself throughout the months to this day is this. Imagine you're the CFO of a company, of a business. That's a chief financial officer. And imagine God is the CEO. He's the one who actually runs this business. And so then God as the CEO decides to do an audit of how you've been managing his finances. If he were to audit you, would he either give you a raise or would he fire me? This is the question I often ask myself, and I pause to think, how have I been stewarding God's finances this month? It's a question I always encourage the audience to ask themselves throughout the weeks as well. The last point here on putting first things first is to ask ourselves, what do we value most? When you talk to a financial advisor, oftentimes they'll dive right into, here's how you achieve optimization of your wealth. But they may not actually stop and ask, why is it that you want to achieve these things? But it's important to actually ask these things because we're loyal to our values. These are the things that motivate us. These are the things that dictate how we make decisions in life. And as Christians especially, we live a life that is often misunderstood. It makes no sense. And so this is a mind map exercise. It's called a mind map exercise. And I encourage families to do this at least twice a year, to sit down with their spouse and create a common language around money. what it does is you put yourself and your family in the middle, and then you look at what are the different things that are important in my life. From there, goals and values often come with a price tag. You can then start to have conversations around how much do we want to allocate from our savings, from our cash flow, towards these different areas. Which of them align? Which of them are contradicting? Let's have this conversation together. And I always say when you have these conversations with family, make sure you do it over a very yummy dinner. You don't want to do this while you're hungry. It's just, you get put in a lot better of a mood. So that's always something I recommend. Okay, let's dive right into then the estate and incapacity side of things here. When it comes to this estate planning side, I like to framework it. We're going to build this financial house together, and there's these 9 different rooms that comprise of this financial house. The idea is this: when we're building a house, we need to build it on solid rock first, before trying to make it really tall and really big. The reason why is because if I have this beautiful chandelier inside of my home, but I build it on sand, then a rainstorm can come along and it never mattered how nice that chandelier was, because the whole house collapses. So I need to make sure the foundation is really sturdy. And in this foundation, one of these key components is going to be this estate plan. So we're going to be talking about the will, the power of attorney, or POA for short, the healthcare directive, and the tax implications that come along with this. So what is estate and incapacity planning? Well, first and foremost, it needs to be motivated by a relationship with God. And here are the key considerations that I always implore my clients to dive into. Number one is, do you have a will? And it is up to date. Do you have that POA and a healthcare agreement? And what are the estate taxes that may potentially come up if you were to pass away? So you can see here, without planning, it's scattered, and the hope is that we're going to be organizing it nice and tight so that the surviving family is going to be well taken care of. Let's start with estate planning, and I'll define everything here. A will is a legal document allowing individuals to express their wishes on the care of assets and children. And so the idea here is there's 2 parts. Number one is if you have particular wishes of how you'd like your assets to be distributed, or if you have particular wishes in a worst case scenario where both spouses pass away, how your children are taken care of if they're minors, then this needs to be written out on paper. The second key component is the will outlines a term called an executor. The executor is like the quarterback. This person is responsible for administering what's called the estate. And the estate is, imagine all the assets that you own personally. So this is going to be things like real estate, bank accounts, investment accounts, anything that's under your name. When you pass away, it gets shoved all into this large garage. And then there's going to be a big garage sale at death. This garage is called your estate. The executor is responsible for administering that estate. They're going to pay the government the taxes that are owed, any creditors such as the bank if any loans are owed, and then they're responsible for administering it to the loved ones. But here's the problem. If there's no will, that means no executor was appointed. This can delay the process, and ultimately the government is going to be the executor. And, well, if you do a quick Google search, you'll see that the reviews were not the best for the public guardian trustee. And so I'll leave it at that as I continue on here. If you don't have one, the other problem is this. It means that you pass away with something called intestacy. And what happens with intestacy is a list of different things. Number one is you lose control over who handles your estate. So rather than a trusted person that you know and who knows your values, you're passing off that reign to somebody else. Again, if you have minor children, no surviving spouse, then that child is in the care of who knows who. There's also preset inflexible rules. So if you wanted a particular amount to go to a particular charity or cause or family member, you have no say over that. It basically gets distributed to a certain amount of people based on preset rules. Along with this as well, if minor children inherit a share of your assets, then unfortunately the public guardian trustee, the government, can actually hold these in trust for your children as well. So you have no control over this. And lastly, I mentioned this already, but this may heavily delay the process by either months or even years before your family can actually get access to the money they're entitled to. The second area is going to be incapacity planning. What this means is if you're not able to make financial decisions on your own while you're alive, so you haven't passed away, like you either got into a serious car crash, for example, or you're not able to make financial decisions while you're alive, the document called a power of attorney is going to allow somebody else to have the power to make decisions for you when you can't. So if you are in a terrible car accident and you're in the hospital, you need to have access to money to pay for the different hospital bills. Well, you can't actually say anything because you're this injured. Somebody else can actually take that money for you and then start to pay these bills for you. They have the ability to access those funds. That's the importance of the POA. And the last one here has nothing to do with finances, but it's something so prevalent. If any of you work in hospitals, you know this better than I do. But the unfortunate reality is, every single day, maybe even every hour, there's families making very difficult decisions in hospitals. One of these decisions is oftentimes, do you pull the plug or not? This is incredibly stressful and difficult. It can tarnish relationships. And so I always recommend to my clients, I highly urge them, set up something called a healthcare agreement or healthcare representative, healthcare directive. You'll see them known as different terms. This outlines your wishes in the event you cannot make decisions on your own regarding your health. It outlines exactly what you want your family to do. It makes it a lot easier for the grieving family to make this decision on your behalf. Now let's talk a little bit about the financial implications of what happens to your assets when you do pass away. Any personally owned assets, so these are going to be things, again, like real estate, bank accounts, investment accounts, held under just my own name. They will be distributed based on what the will outlines. So those instructions go. It then gets hit with an additional fee called probate. And what probate is the government saying, well, we have to read your will, we have to take the time to go through everything, and then administer. So we're going to charge you. It's going to be 1.4% of the entirety of your estate, of that garage. The other problem here is going to be that all your assets are going to be considered sold. So if we had real estate that we bought in the late 90s, and then 2025, let's say, rolls around, we pass away, all that growth, that's capital gains, that's going to be taxable. So the biggest tax bill is actually going to be at death. So that's the problem with personally owned assets. And a lot of families, they'll overly depend on the will. This is one of the main problems. You can't avoid the probate, you can't avoid the capital gains tax. That's known as deemed disposition, by the way. So then there's three other approaches that families enjoy taking. The first one is going to be setting up jointly owned assets. So this might apply for things like bank accounts or non-registered investment accounts. So what this allows for this to happen is something known as the right of survivorship. And what this does is, if my account is jointly owned with my spouse, then if I were to pass away, my asset just rolls over to the spouse without any tax implications, and it happens practically right away. So you don't have the stress of having to deal with all the estate legal litigations. It just goes right over to my spouse. So it's a lot more stress-free and tax efficient in this manner. For real estate in particular, there's two main ways that you want to consider. There's joint tenancy, and there's tenants in common. I don't know why they make it so complicated, but there is a significant difference here. Joint tenancy is typically the one that people often want. This is the one where if I were to pass away and I jointly own my real estate property with my wife, then my 50% goes to her 50%, allowing her to have 100% of the property. Tenants in common is slightly different. Tenants in common is this. If I own 50% of a property with, let's say, a friend of mine, but if I were to pass away, I don't want my 50% to go automatically to my friend, then what happens is that 50 goes back into my estate. So then it will be hit with the probate, with the capital gains taxes and whatnot. It does not roll over right away. So if you're hoping that you had a joint asset with your spouse, maybe just double check the legal jargon to see that it's joint tenancy, not tenants in common. The other strategy is going to be designated beneficiaries. What this means is this. Rather than having my assets go into that garage, it's going to bypass all that. It'll bypass the estate, it'll bypass probate. It goes directly from myself to my loved one. And that's what a beneficiary is. This is going to allow the process to happen within days rather than months or even years. You can set this up using things like an RRSP. So these are different investment accounts that you can invest within. You can use FHSA as well, which is the first home savings account, or again, the RSP, which is the Registered Retirement Savings Plan. The tax-free savings account, TFSA, is unique because you can set up something called a successor holder. This is really important as well. A successor holder allows your TFSA to stay as a TFSA and then be brought to your spouse staying as a TFSA. Ultimately, tax-free investments, so none of the growth of those investments will be taxed, and then when you take your money out, it'll be completely tax-free as well. The RSP, on the other hand, the money will have to be taken out of that account and given to the beneficiary as cash. So they no longer get to enjoy the registered retirement savings plan benefits. The other item here is going to be life insurance. Life insurance, basically how it works is you're going to be putting your money towards this policy, a promise that says when you pass away, then there will be a lump sum amount of tax-free money that goes to a loved one. And the idea here is you'll put in a certain lump sum of money, but multiples of that will be guaranteed to pay out. And the reason why often is because human beings have a 100% chance of passing away. So whether you pass away tomorrow or whether you pass away 40 years from now, whatever you put in, more than what you put in will be passed down to the next generation, assuming it's a permanent life insurance policy. The last one here is called a segregated fund. This one's really interesting, and a lot of times I'll come to families and they've actually never heard of it. A segregated fund is like a mutual fund. You can think of it like a basket of fruits. Rather than just owning apples, you own bananas and pears and apples, all sorts of fruits, because we don't know which fruit is going to be the best. So you have all sorts of different investments inside of this basket. That's typically a mutual fund. And then what you can do is you can wrap it with an insurance wrapper. That's what a segregated fund is. So what does this mean? It means you get two guarantees attached to it. Number one is, let's say I have $1 million and I'm worried that if I invest in the stock market, it might come crashing down 40% tomorrow. But what if I pass away tomorrow? Then my children only get 60% of what's left over. So instead, if you use a segregated fund, this is how it works. If markets come down to $600,000 and I pass away, the insurance company says, we're gonna top you back up to the $1 million. That's the promise, the guarantee that's attached to the segregated fund. The second guarantee that's attached to the seg fund is known as a maturity guarantee. So after 15 years, for example, I've had this investment and I decide I want to take my money out to spend it for retirement. But it's actually lower than what I put in. Then likewise, they'll top it back up to at least what you put in. These are the guarantees that are attached. However, it's important to note that seg funds typically have higher fees than other type of investments because you're paying for that additional service. The last thing to note with seg funds is its powerful estate planning tool. So sometimes people get it for the guarantees. Other times, more popular I would suggest, people get it for the estate planning side. A non-registered investment typically always has to be owned personally, but with a seg fund, you can attach a beneficiary to your non-registered investment. So what this means is you typically have these tax-efficient investments, RSP, TFSA, FHSA. Those are maxed out. You can't put any more money in. You're not left with a ton more options, so you decide to invest in a normal account, a non-registered account. From this, if you pass away, it's supposed to be taxed personally, but with a segregated fund, you can bypass all that and have it go straight to a loved one. That's what it means. Lastly here, I'll just quickly speak on trust. If you have any further question on trust, you can feel free to talk to me afterwards. Trust is basically like a moving truck. It's going to hold an asset for you, and then it's going to hold on to it until it's ready to drop off that asset, either all at once or over a period of time to a loved one. And so there's different ways that you can structure a trust, but the idea here is even after you pass away, you have control in your grave of what your asset is doing. That's the idea of a trust, because it bypasses probate. It's still within this moving truck, even though you passed away. It doesn't get distributed right away. So let's do a little case study here to help illustrate this idea. So in this case study, I have Mickey and Minnie with two kids, Donald and Daisy. Mickey is 88 and he passes away, and his wife Minnie is 85 and she's still alive. Here are the different properties that they own. So you'll see principal residence. This is the home that you live in. When Mickey passes away, the principal residence is worth $3 million. And the original cost, let's say bought it in the 90s, was $300,000. That means there's a gain. It's grown by $2.7 million. I'll talk about the taxable inclusion just at the end. The rental property is the next consideration. So at death, it's considered to be $1.5 million. The original cost is $300,000, which makes there a growth of $1.2 million. And let's say this family also had a vacation property, a cottage or a resort, valued at 1.5. Original cost was 500, so there's a gain of $1 million here. Now, if all these things are jointly owned, as it's highlighted, there's not going to be any tax at Mickey's death. Why? Because of that spousal rollover. When Mickey passes away, his 50% of the share just rolls over to Minnie. So there's not going to be any tax implications. Well, that's the reason there's no tax for the capital gains here. However, there is inevitably going to be tax when Minnie passes away. Let's say in this scenario, Minnie lives for another 5 years and passes at age 90. You can see here that the principal residence has grown to $4 million. Original cost is the same. That means that the capital gain is grown by 3.5. The rental property is $2 million. Original cost is the same. It's grown by 1.7. And then the vacation home is at $2 million. Started at 500. It's 1.5 mil. So what are the tax implications now looking like for a family like this? This is how we break it down. The principal residence will not have any tax because of its tax exempt status. In Canada, we get to enjoy that the home that we live in, we don't pay any capital gains tax on it. For rental properties, however, these are investments. That growth, you divide it by 2, and $850,000, that is what's considered taxable. And I'll show you how to calculate the tax based on that taxable amount in a second here. And same thing applies, so there's a $1.5 million gain. Half of this is taxable. How much is it taxable by? Well, you take that total amount, and then you need to almost imagine that this is the income that you received for that year. Remember, when you pass away, it's like you sold everything, which is like you've earned $1.whatever million for that year. And if I look at tax charts, you can see that any income that you've earned over $200,000, $259,000, gets taxed at 53.5%. So you take that capital gains, the taxable amount, and this is how much tax you need to pay on that amount, just over 50%. So this is the eye-opening part here. What is that tax impact looking like for my family? I have the $1.6 million of capital gains, which are the sale of the 2 properties. And let's say Minnie also had some RIF income left over. So this is going to be income from her retirement account. And she also had a pension, let's say in this scenario, of an additional $50,000. So it's like she earned $1.75 million at death because she didn't do proper planning here. So with this amount, we then multiply that by the 53% tax bracket. That's going to leave us with $885,000 of tax owing. And then there's the additional probate cost, which I mentioned earlier, 1.4% of the total estate value. You add this up, there's a tax bill owing of over $1 million. And here's the biggest problem. Who needs to pay this $1 million? It's not Mickey, it's not Minnie, it's going to be the family that's left surviving. So this is the importance of estate planning, because it allows the surviving family that's grieving to not have to also then stress about the finances and the timeliness of when these assets get distributed as well. So then the question becomes, well, how do we pay this $1 million? This is difficult. There's 3 main ways that we can pay for it. The first one is to save for it. This one's going to be the easiest option. You just simply have some liquid savings in a savings account set aside for this. Oftentimes, though, families won't have $1 million sitting in cash, so this is usually not a typical option. The other 2 is going to be either selling our property or securing a life insurance policy. I'm going to go into detail about these 2. When it comes to selling an asset, there's a few problems associated with this. A very good friend of mine has a family home that's been there for generations over in the Sunshine Coast. And when I visited for the first time, I was just amazed. I said, oh, I love it. This is amazing. And he would tell me all these stories simply by pointing at a rock. He would go, oh, I had these memories here with my brother, my sister. We did these things over at this rock. See that log over there? We did this. See that over there? He would just point out all these memories along the way, just from different places around his house. I remember thinking, wow, this must be really, really important to you. And he said, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it feels like my childhood was here. And so the problem with having to sell the asset is, unfortunately, that means all those memories and the closeness that the family feels to that property will have to go out the window. In terms of selling that asset, as many of us may know, that selling real estate can be difficult. And if we urgently need that money to pay this tax bill, otherwise the whole thing is frozen, the government is not willing to distribute that estate, you're going to have to do something called a fire sale. And this comes up on the news all the time, and it's an unfortunate reality. There will be investors ready with cash on hand to take advantage of people in these situations. What a fire sale is there's going to be a family that needs to sell their real estate property in order to pay for that tax bill. But because no one's willing to buy it, unless they wait another 6 months, they'll have to sell it at a significant discount. This is what a fire sale is, and it's the last thing that people will want to do, but sometimes that's the only option that they can resort to. Number 2 is will contestability. If a long-lost cousin comes up and says, hey, I know that this is what the will says, but I'm related. Actually, I remember talking to mom. or my aunt, and I remember her telling me, she actually wanted me to have a lump sum amount of money. As soon as something like this comes up, BC in particular is notorious for this. Everything gets shut down, frozen, the government needs to investigate. This again can delay the process by months or even years. Number 3 is tax and probate. So as I mentioned before, you're going to be paying hefty capital gains tax, and you're going to be paying the probate fees as well, above any amounts that are over $25,000 of the estate. And the settlement time frame, as I just mentioned, this can take months or years for us to, even for a simple estate, for the money to get distributed so that we can pay for the various expenses, such as even things like the funeral expense, for that matter. So there have been situations where the surviving family would need to go into debt to pay for these various expenses because the estate is frozen. Life insurance, on the other hand, this is a consideration that people often make. Number 1 is there's a beneficiary designation. It bypasses this whole process. You don't have to go through any of these legal implications, because as soon as you show that death certificate or the body, those are the 2 requirements, what happens is the money gets paid out within days to the beneficiaries. Number 2 is it's a lot more confidential. So many people didn't realize this, but a will is actually a public record. So if there's a scenario where a family decided one child is doing a lot better than the other, I want to give more to this rather than to this child. Or for whatever reason, they just decide, I want to give more to this one child than the other. Anyone can search this up, actually. A will is completely public record. So many families value the confidentiality that comes with a life insurance policy, because you cannot search any of these things up. It's completely private. I mentioned how quick it is. You get it within days, rather than having to wait years. It bypasses any tax and probate, so you pay 0 tax on this amount. You can get $1 million completely tax-free. And also it multiplies what you put in. So in order for me to have $1 million payout to my family, I can go about it in 2 ways. I can either save that money and then have that money get distributed, or for a life insurance policy, the idea is something like, I'll put in $1 and then $3 gets paid out. So from an estate planning perspective, it is arguably the most efficient way, because it's tax efficient and it multiplies your wealth better than any tool out there. So there's a guy named Tom Deans who says, insurance is a financial investment to provide for our family when we can't. That's the idea here. So I'll quickly dive into really how insurance works and the different types of insurance that families often consider. So we're going to be hitting this room of the financial house, and it's going to be still part of that foundation that we're building. The 3 main types are going to be disability, critical illness, and life insurance. Life insurance is by far the most popular, but many families do enjoy hearing about the other 2 as well. So I'll go through it. Imagine we're in a scenario where we're looking for a new job, and we see 2 job listings in the newspaper, job A and job B. They're described to be the exact same in terms of job duties, but their pay structure is slightly different. Job A says, we'll pay you $77,500, for example, but if you can't come to work, we're not giving you any money. And this is, can't come to work because you're sick or you're hurt, for example. Job B, on the other hand, says, we'll pay you slightly less at $75,500, but if you can't come to work because you're hurt or sick, we'll give you $66,000, either until you're better, or all the way to retirement. So they see these 2 options, people go, well, I'll go with job B. And then I'll ask them, why is that? And it's because of that safety net. Along with this, the other consideration is it's not $66,000 for a single year, but $66,000 potentially until retirement, potentially for the next 10 years. If you add an extra 0 to that, that's a large asset. So I always tell my young clients especially, if you're starting your career, this is something you're going to want to look at, see if you have any gaps from your work plan, and you can top it up with the personal plan. Because if something happens to you, then what are your options? You can either go into debt, use up your savings, which were meant for other goals, or become heavily dependent. But that's the last case resort that many people do not want to resort to. So this is how disability insurance works. You're going to put your money towards a policy that says, if I can't go to work, you will pay me a tax-free passive income on a monthly basis, and this will replace my income. That's the importance of disability insurance. And I like to use this analogy to illustrate my point as well. We all know the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. And so with Jack and the Beanstalk, he went up that beanstalk to get a golden goose, I believe. And in this story, we have this golden goose and this golden egg. But in this story, the goose will lay eggs every single day. But these eggs will not lay any more geese. They're just like golden bricks. So if that's the case, we can ask ourselves, which one do I want to keep and protect? Well, it's the goose every single day, because it's laying the eggs every single day, the eggs don't lay any more geese. So what does this all represent? This represents things like our house, our car, our vacation, our cottage, and the goose is you. So this is a big perspective change. In society, we know to get house insurance, home insurance, car insurance, travel insurance, but oftentimes people are not actually getting insurance on themselves. You are the one that's going to work every day. You are the one that's producing the income. You are the one that's able to pay for these various expenses. If something happens to the income, it doesn't matter if I have the house, car insurance, because I won't be able to save up for another vacation, continue to pay for my mortgage, etc. So right now it's actually heavily backwards. We always say protect the goose first, not just the eggs. And this next one is called a critical illness insurance policy. This one was actually created by a heart surgeon in South Africa. And what he noticed was that more and more people were coming into hospitals because of major illnesses, things like heart attacks, stroke, cancer. But what he was able to do was get them out of the hospitals because he's healing them medically. But the problem was the cost of these services often remained high. And the saying goes, unfortunately, in BC, you'll pass away from the wait line before you pass away from the illness. MSP exists, but it can be very, very slow oftentimes. And so what the heart surgeon realized was that, hey, people need money during these difficult times. So he was actually the one who went to insurance companies and said, let's create some sort of a policy where if somebody gets cancer, somebody gets some sort of a critical illness, they get $100,000 into their lap, and they can use it for whatever it needs to be used for. Some of the examples here are going to be things like medical equipment, emergency medication, childcare, lifestyle changes, and a big one is going to be allowing family members, your spouse, to take time away from work to spend it with you, rather than worrying financially. And a big benefit that people often enjoy hearing is, well, what if I never get sick? What then? If you never get sick, you actually get every single dollar back anyways. So that's the idea of critical illness insurance. It's almost like a forced savings account. If you get sick, you get a payout. If you don't get sick, you get your money back. That's the idea. And especially with younger families, they'll ask me, well, what are the odds that I'll get cancer in my lifetime? And I was very surprised to see this. I thought it was maybe 15%, because in my life personally, I didn't know that many people who had a critical illness. But according to the Canadian Cancer Society, it's actually nearly 1 in 2. So it's about 45% for men and 43% for women. And the idea here is life insurance will pay out when you pass away, but critical illness insurance will pay out while you're alive and need the money. So this is the main difference. So then let's dive into that life insurance conversation. When I sit down with the clients to talk about life insurance, what I do is I'll ask them this question. If you were to pass away yesterday, who is financially impacted? Does anybody depend on you financially? If the answer is yes, very likely you'll want to consider life insurance. And so some of these people might be children or your spouse, maybe parents as well. Depends on the situation. So then I'll show them, here are a few considerations that you can make as well. These are some of the expenses that come up at death. Final expenses, things like funeral costs, surprisingly quite expensive here in Vancouver. Debt elimination. If there's any major debts that need to be paid off, these can be paid off very efficiently with life insurance. Housing and mortgage. So if there's a situation where two people decide to get married and they bought a home together, well, we believe that it becomes one unit. They're equally yoked and they become one unit. They're leaning on each other financially oftentimes. If they're both servicing the mortgage, but one unfortunately falls off because they pass away unexpectedly, how is this person going to continue supporting that mortgage cost? They often can't, and they'll fall off as well. So this is the idea. If I were to pass away, it would be the worst day of my parents' life, for example, but I can have it be the day that they get to retire. So for that reason, personally, I got life insurance for my parents because I just recognized that they sacrificed so much for me to come to Canada and live the life that I have. And I'm basically their retirement plan. So I want to make sure that that retirement plan is still intact, even if something happens to me. So that's how I design my personal policy. The other thing that so that's the family legacy side. The other thing that we typically say is if you are married, for example, and you depend on each other financially, at least 10 times your income is typically recommended, so that if you were to pass away, your surviving spouse can comfortably not be financially impacted for the next 10 years. That's the idea. So here's a nice summary of the different types of insurance that I just quickly discussed here. So again, the disability is going to be the monthly income replacement. Critical illness insurance, lump sum, if you have any illness. Life insurance is a lump sum to beneficiaries. And then there is one for business owners. Basically, you have business costs on a month-to-month basis. This covers that for you as well. I also mentioned that you can look to top up any of your group plans, your plans through work with the personal plan. Many people don't recognize that you can have both. You can. So let's say there's one that has no critical illness insurance, you can get a personal policy. Let's say there's one that has a disability policy, but it doesn't give you as much income that you'd like. You can top that up with a personal policy. The other consideration is you can't take the group plan with you into retirement. As soon as you leave your job, that plan leaves as well. The personal plan follows you regardless of where you go in life. Okay, now let's dive right into planning for retirement. And how I intend to do this is going to be addressing some of the most commonly asked questions that I get and showing you a case study of how somebody would actually go from their working years into their work optional years. This is some of the exciting stuff. Number one is they ask me, how can I do some tax planning to keep more of what I earn? This is really important because wealth is not measured based on what you earn, but it's measured based on what you keep. For example, if somebody earns $1 million, but spends $1 million, they have no money. If somebody earns 50 grand, but spends 20 grand, this person is actually wealthier than the person who earns $1 million. And here's the reality when it comes to taxes in Canada. We pay a lot of tax. When you start working, you pay income tax. When you start saving and investing outside of those registered accounts, you pay tax anytime the money generates income for you. When you start spending this money, you pay tax. And then when you pass away, you pay tax. So if we're able to, it would be nice to save on tax at each of those 4 areas. And that's why I have a job. So let's take a look here. How can we do that? The first thing we want to address is going to be the tax credits and the tax deductions. These are two different ways that you can lower that tax bill. A credit is like this. If I go to the grocery store and I have $100 worth of groceries, but I take out a coupon for $20, then I get to basically reduce the cost by $20, just $1 for $1 reduction. So a tax credit is like a coupon against the taxes I owe. If the government says you owe me $1,000 in taxes this year, but I have $200 of a tax credit, then I take that and I reduce it by $200. There's various examples of this, and I have a list in my next slide. A tax deduction is slightly different. The deduction decreases your taxable income. So I showed you previously that your taxes are based on certain rates. So if I earn $100,000, I'm in the maybe 30% tax rate. But if I have a $20,000 deduction, I go from a $100,000 income to an $80,000 income. Now I'm in a lower tax rate. This is the idea. So then everything that my taxes are based off goes down because my income is going down. And there's different ways for me to claim this, but this is better for those with higher incomes because higher the income, the more tax that you're paying. So let's look at this list here. So for tax credits, the coupons, the three main ones are going to be tuition. If you paid for school, then a portion of those expenses are going to be a tax credit. If you don't have a health insurance plan, for example, then the cost that you pay for dental, physio, etc., a portion of this can be a tax credit as well. And then charitable donations. So if we donate to ECBC in the form of tithing, for example, then we get a tax slip, and then that's why they always say, look at the wall and in the foyer and look at your numbers because you want to report for tax. That's the reason why. For the common deductions, here are some of the common deductions that are out there. RRSP and FHSA contributions, so these again are investment accounts you can open up. When I put money inside of them, immediately I get hit with the tax deduction. It decreases my taxable income based on how much I put in. Next are moving expenses. If I move 40 kilometers or more closer to work for those purposes, then I'm able to use those moving expenses as a deduction as well. A health spending account is going to be primarily for business owners. If I run a corporation and I do not want to set up a health insurance plan, but instead I want to claim some of my personal expenses that I use for dental and medical costs, I can do so, and then it's a deduction to the corporation. For other things, there's also going to be things like employment expenses. So depending on the type of job you have, certain expenses such as gas mileage or your cell phone can be potentially deductible as well. You'll just simply need to talk to your employer about this. And lastly here is going to be business expenses. So I have this in my next slide. So as a self-employed person, let's say I either run my own business or I'm doing a side hustle, a common question I get asked is, how do write-offs work? Do I have to be incorporated, or can I deduct the exact same thing if I'm self-employed as a sole proprietor? The answer is, it doesn't matter what type of structure you have. the deductions are the same. And here's how it works. The litmus test is called reasonable expectation of profit. Is there a reasonable expectation that what I'm spending money on for my business is going to make me money? If what I'm spending money on is going to make me money, those expenses reduce my taxable income. And so here's just a list of some of them. For example, if I hire a contractor to do some job and I pay them, that's going to be a deduction. If I pay some sort of insurance for my business, that's a deduction. Any licenses, professional fees that I need in order to operate, those again are deductions. If I travel to a conference that's related to my job, all those fees will be deductions. If I work from home, then you can claim that as a deduction as well. And then there's also depreciation. This one needs to be done carefully, but for example, if I buy a car for work purposes, and we know that cars go down in value every year, then that is actually used as a deduction. It's a major one against the taxes that you owe, or against the income that you earn. So then the other question I often get is, when should I incorporate? If I'm a self-employed person, then does it make sense for me to set up a corporation? I'll first off explain what a corporation is. The idea here is no longer am I the one earning the income, but I'm going to set up a separate corporation, and it's the business that earns the income. The reason you do this is two main reasons. Number one is the business enjoys a lower tax rate than myself. Number two is going to be for creditor or liability protection, because there's a layer of protection. There's more distance. If I get sued, for example, it's the business assets that get sued, not my personal assets, such as my home and my personal investments. Think of it like a motorcyclist driving with a helmet versus not without a helmet. Both can potentially get hurt, but if you have a helmet, there's probably a better chance that you'll get hurt a little bit less. Yeah. So when should you incorporate? The general litmus test is when you can save $40,000 a year inside of your corporation. If you can do this, oftentimes the math works out. However, you want to ask yourself certain questions like, do I have certain debts I want to pay off? Or is there a big purchase I'm hoping to do, such as a home purchase? I see a few people taking photos, so I'll pause here. In terms of enjoying that lower tax rate, you can see here the highest tax rate for personal is 53%, while businesses enjoy a 11% tax rate instead. So this is one of the reasons a person would want to incorporate. Now let's dive right into how much you need to retire. So let's say a client comes up to me, we're going to call her Lydia in this case. Lydia tells me, well, I'm 50 years old and I want to retire at 65 with $80,000 a year of income. Let's take a look. She's asking me, how much money do I need to have saved? That's the number one question I get. So I have $80,000 of a desire for a 30-year retirement. Let's call it 65 to 95. Maybe she won't live till 95, but it's better to plan longer rather than shorter in case she lives longer. So that's equivalent to about $6,667 a month of income that she needs. There's two ways I can quickly calculate this. There's something called the rule of 4% and the rule of 3%. And the idea here is this. If you have a certain lump sum of money and you extract 4% from this every single year, you can successfully have a 30-year retirement. So how I do the math is $80,000 divided by 4% gives me $2 million. So then I will tell her, you need $2 million in order to retire in 15 years at age 65 with the lifestyle that you're looking for. But the person who actually invented the rule of 4%, he himself said it's not perfect because investments, as we know, don't perfectly go like this, but they're often like this. So let's be more conservative and use a smaller number. So you take the 80,000 divided by 3%, and it gives us $2.6 million here. Lydia will look at me and go, are you kidding me? I need $2.5 million in 15 years. And I say, hold on, let's take a look. There's three main pillars of savings that are supporting this bridge that are taking us from those working years to these work optional years. And this is the key thing that people walk away feeling like, okay, this makes sense to me. The three main pillars are going to be, number one, the government. We will get some sort of income from the government. Number two is going to be the employer. This is some sort of pension if you have one through your work. And number three is the personal side of things. How much then do I need to save to top up the rest? Let's start off with the government. Let's understand the government benefits that come through. The first one is called CPP, the Canadian Pension Plan. This one you'll see if you go to your pay stub, about 6% or so of your paycheck goes towards CPP. If you're self-employed and a sole proprietor, you pay for the employee portion as well the employer portion because you're your own boss. And what it is it's a guaranteed pension depending on how much you put in and depending on how long you've worked. It's also indexed to inflation. What that means is we know that the cost of all these things around us go up every single year. This will increase every single year as well. So then how much can I get and when can I claim it? You can claim it as early as age 60 or as late as age 70, but the middle ground is going to be 65. If you claim it earlier, then there's going to be a reduction of 36%. If you claim it later, then the government says we'll increase it by 42%. And so the maximum is going to be 1433 if you work for 39 years in Canada, making an average about $50,000 at least. However, you'll notice that, wow, 40 years or so in Canada working, that's a long time. Not a lot of people start working from 25 to 65, or they'll have breaks in between. So you'll see the average payout is more so like $900 or so. Old age security has nothing to do with income. It's simply how long have you lived in Canada for. So if you've lived in Canada for 40 years and you're 65 years old, that's the earliest you can claim it, and you would basically get here $727 a month. At age 75, they made a recent update to this where you'll enjoy a little bump, and that goes up to $800 a month or so. And so if you do defer this as well, instead of claiming at 65, you decide to get it later at age 70, you'll enjoy a 36% increase as well. And this one here is also going to be income tested. It's called Guaranteed Income Supplement. This one here, if you earn $22,000 or less, then you'll actually be given an additional bump up here of $1,000. So this is just income dependent, and that goes for a single individual. I will mention one really important thing here. For the old age security, if you earn too much money, and that's going to be $90,000 or so, then every dollar you earn above that amount, the government starts to claw back, take away 15 cents of your old age security. And so this means if you earn about $148,000 in retirement, then your old age security is completely clawed back. So then the tax planning comes in of how can I have tax-free income sources, so that if I'm making money from my TFSA, for example, the government's saying you earn $0, as an example. The second pillar is going to be the employer-sponsored pillar. So we're going to look at the two types of pensions that exist. The first one is a DC, defined contribution plan. This one says you know exactly how much you're contributing. So I'm going to put in this much every single year, every single month. And how much I get at 65 is simply dependent on how much I put in and how much it's grown by, based on stock markets. The other one is a defined benefit plan. This is the best type of plan that exists, less and less popular these days. This one says it's defined how much you put in, but it's also promised exactly how much you're going to get at retirement. So let's say Lydia, in this case, decided to work at a hospital. Hospitals enjoy that DB plan. And she's guaranteed at 65 to about $4,700 there. So if that's the case here, we now know that her government pillar is providing her some sort of money. Her employer pillar is providing her money. We then need to see what's the top up that's required. And we can see it here. She needs $6,667. She has a pension giving her $47. She has her government income of $1,400. She just needs $500 or so a month now at this point. So I simply do that math. $500 times 12 is going to give me $6,684. Again, with that 3% rule. Now I tell Lydia, you need to save $200,000 rather than $2 million. That's a lot more feasible. How do I save that? This is how. We're going to look at these different ways that we can save and invest. There's two main ways. There's tax-free investing and there's tax-deferred investing. Tax-free says this: when I put my money in my account and it grows, there's no tax paid on that. Then when I want to spend that money, it's completely tax-free. Tax-deferred means I eventually need to pay the tax. I kick the can down the road. As it's growing, there's no tax owing. But then when I spend that money, it's like I earned a bonus at work. And here's the impact of taxes on our investments. If in this hypothetical scenario, I have a dollar double 20 times, by the 20th double, it goes to $1 million. But if I implement a 25% tax on each of these doubles, you'll notice here that it only grows to $72,000. So the exact same amount of growth is happening, but the tax eats up the growth heavily. So that's why we need to make sure we use these different accounts: TFSA, RSP, and the first home savings account. For the sake of time, I'll leave this here. You can ask me about it after or take a picture. But the idea here is you typically want to use the RSP for retirement, and you want to put money in when your income is high, and take it out when your income is low, more often in retirement. For the tax-free savings account, you can use this more as a flexible account on a general basis for the short, medium, and long term. For the first home savings account, this one is going to be used often for those who are looking to buy their first home. If you don't actually intend to buy your first home, you can actually just roll this over to your registered retirement savings plan as well. So then in terms of investments that we can choose, you can see here that the lower you go, the lower expected return you expect to have. You expect to make more money by taking on the risk that you have. You expect to be compensated for taking on risk. So cash is very safe. GICs are guaranteed investment certificates. These are things that are just guaranteed. You'll get a certain amount of, you put a certain amount of money in, you get that money back with some interest. Bonds are the similar concept, but you're giving your money, lending your money to a government or to a company. You get that money back with some interest. ETFs are like a basket of stocks or bonds or different investments, and these are going to be considered a little bit more high risk. But depending on how you structure it, it can give anywhere from expected 4 to 7, maybe 8% returns on an annualized basis. Stocks and then alternatives. Stocks are basically you own a tiny piece of a company. If you really believe in a particular brand or company, then your piece of ownership, the value will go up if the company succeeds as well. In terms of alternatives, there's a whole bunch of other options out there as well, but for the sake of time, we'll skip by that for today. So this is a nice overview of a breakdown for the safe investments and the risky investments. And then lastly here, what I want to quickly mention is for diversification. So exactly which stocks, which bonds, which investments do we own? This chart illustrates that we have no idea which investment is going to be best next year. So what do? You own everything. And the reason why is because you can see in 1 year, the emerging markets were one of the best investments on the top. But then the next year was the worst. And then it was the best. I have no idea, so simply own everything. Spread your eggs amongst various baskets, not just one. The Canadian pension plan themselves does exactly that. They'll own assets all over the world and all over different types of investments. And then here as well, so people that ask me, don't stocks go down? I tell them yes, but every single time in history, a well-diversified portfolio has always gone up more than it's gone down, as illustrations show. Okay, so then Lydia asked me, well, okay, if I need to save $200,000 in 15 years, how much do I need to save on a monthly basis? And I just simply run a quick calculation. For Lydia, she just needs to save $1,000 a month with a 5% return to hit that goal that she has. With a 5% return, we can do a combination of stocks and bonds, and it won't be too crazy volatile with minimal risk, and she'll be able to get there comfortably. So this is really my last slide here. She did it. She can basically have $1,400 from the government, $4,700 from her employer, and then $560 by having $224,000, which she built by putting $1,000 a month in over the next 15 years. So here are my 3 takeaways. Number 1 is going to be put God first. The Bible often talks about money, but we're called to be responsible stewards of His wealth. And then number 2 is set up your power of attorney, your will, your healthcare directive. Ensure your assets are designed in a tax-efficient manner to roll over to the next generation. And then number 3 is to plan for retirement. You have 3 main income sources for retirement. Look to see what are these income sources looking like and how many of them are tax-free. That's pretty much it. Thank you so much for listening here today.